My name's Nikolas Badminton. Thanks for the introduction, Carolyn. I've basically spent the last decade or so focused in on developing my practice out as a Foresight expert, futurist. I help organizations look out 5, 10, 20 plus years into the future so we can create future narratives that can really inform the strategic thinking that we undertake today. But I started off when I was born in the southwest of England, and I was born in a 5,000 person agricultural village. My father was the manager of a slaughterhouse that was in the middle of the town there, and that was a particularly interesting smell every couple of weeks when they emptied the blood tanks. He moved on from there to work in the dairy industry and the cheese and dairy product industry for 28 years. I actually started off programming computers in his cheese cold store, so I'm kind of born into the sort of the agriculture industry, but I sort of went into a focus on data analytics. I did artificial intelligence at university back in the 90s, and now I help organizations try and create resiliency by looking into the future. And one of those books that I read when I was 8 years old was a book called The Osborne Book of the Future, and it kind of it illustrated a world that was going to be wondrous, and it was going to be people living on the moon and growing crops, people harvesting the seabeds, and all sorts of agricultural progressive technologies. And I think that what's really interesting is that agriculture is one of the most exciting things that I talk about. I've been speaking about it for a number of years, a number of big conferences. I'm always excited to speak to people that work in the industry, whether they're providing agrochemicals, agri-tech, or they're the farmers on the ground doing the work. It's an incredibly exciting time to be alive. The Q&A that just preceded this presentation was really eye-opening to me, because things like artificial intelligence and data, suborbital internet, are part of a normal vernacular these days. So that's exciting to see as well. And this presentation is going to take you in to look at some of the signals of things that are happening today that indicate that the future is going to be different. And that's really what I do. We get caught in our day-to-day operations. We look at our quarterly revenues, and we tend to look out very short term. And that short-termism is kind of damaging when we're thinking strategically about our businesses in the long term. So I like to invite people to ask, what if the future was different? What if a particular piece of technology was applied? What if, climate change was going to accelerate, and really be creative about how the world is going to change. So what's interesting here is that this is a foundation of the workshop that I'm going to be presenting after this. Now this keynote is going to be for about 30 minutes. Then we're going to have a 30-minute Q&A. Then we're going to go into the workshop. I'll explain a little bit more about the workshop then. But then what we're going to do now is just keep your questions that you've got to yourselves until the end, and I'll get you to sort of put your hands up or sort of pipe up about the questions you have. So yeah, we'll get to all your questions about any part of the presentation when we get there. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to jump in to look at the signals of change, and I'm going to disappear off the screen and take you through some of the things that I see happening today that are indicating that the world is going to be different. And a combination of these signals actually become trends, and we've got an exercise around that. And those trends are really going to impact the agricultural business. The first thing that I like to talk about is industrial revolutions. Now, what's interesting is the last 270, 280 years, we've seen huge leaps ahead with technology. But if you go back and start to consider where agriculture came from, it comes back thousands of years into the past. And the next big leap forward was that beginning of the Industrial Revolution and the beginning of the nuclear age, the computer age, and these industrial revolutions that have kind of brought us to where we are today. And people have spoken on the call already about fourth industrial revolution. We'll get into that. The first industrial revolution was obviously around energy, transportation, and communications. And back there, the innovations in each of these areas would combine and exponentially grow the businesses around what we're trying to do in terms of the production of clothing, production of food, the extraction and the distribution of energy. But what we found is that these industrial revolutions have put us into a little bit of a world of hurt. There's lots of discussions around the state of climate right now. And what we're finding is that global temperature is going to get warmer. It's going to continue to be an issue. And whilst we may not see on a year-to-year basis huge cataclysmic events, as some people like to talk about, things are definitely changing slowly as we go over time. But what's interesting is with the pandemic, we thought, oh, maybe this is an opportunity to put the brakes on and to rethink how we're burning fuel and how we look at the world. And so, in some ways we can, but really fossil CO2 emissions are growing, but they're growing more slowly. But okay, they're still growing. If everyone can just be on mute, that'd be great. Thank you. Fossil CO2 emissions are still growing. They're growing more slowly, which is heartening. But we need to start stopping that. So what does that look like? What's really interesting, when I have lots of conversations, I tend to wheel out the big guns when I try and look for some evidence around this, and I lean into the United States Army War College, because who's going to basically argue against them? They actually put together an incredible report, and there's a link at the bottom of this page. So you go to the PDFs that I sent out earlier and go and read that. But really what we're going to have is more extreme weather events. We're certainly seeing some of that. This polar vortex has really gone down really quite far into Texas right now. There's going to be rising seas, population migrations, the Arctic sea ice is going to be impacted, and drought and warming will put an increased strain on the US power grid and also the power grids in North America. I do think that all of these things are going to exacerbate, and they're going to really start to cause issues as the world gets warmer. Now, some people like to think that we're moving into a world where the use of fossil fuels is going to lapse a little bit, and we're going to move into a mix that's much more around renewable energy. It's definitely slow, but it's getting there. And the world is very much focused on developing a lot of technology in this area. And today we find ourselves in the fourth industrial revolution. So we've got social media moving faster than ever before, renewable energy, autonomous transportation, interconnected by the internet. There's a lot of discussion right now around space, and I'm advising a number of clients on where the space industry is going. So this fourth industrial revolution is going to the next level. But it's kind of taken a pandemic to show us that these industrial revolutions have kind of failed us a little bit. Energy, transportation, food supply, cultural dissonance, and so much more has been affected by that pandemic. It's shown the fragility of what we've created. I mean, now we're sort of in 2021, and we're starting to feel that this is kind of normal. But what we're finding is that a lot of these industries have been shaken to the core. For example, look at e-commerce. That grew in 8 months as much as it would have grown in 10 years. So we're seeing technology really starting to leap ahead. And now I think that we're in a different paradigm of thinking. Yes, we can look at transportation, energy, and communications. And yes, they're connected and internetized. And I think that now we add a dimension around ecology, the world ecology, and also our biology as well. And the data being harvested there is something that's going to be really important for agriculture as a whole. So yeah, this is how I like to look at the world. And I call this infinite humanity. Okay, let's get into the signals of change and what's actually changing out there in the world. Let's look at renewable energy, and what if we divest from using fossil fuels and aim for reducing carbon? There's a discussion here around aiming for carbon zero, and what we should be doing is just aiming for a reduction every single year, because if you aim for those big goals, it sometimes slips up on us. But people are saying that 86% of global energy demand could be met by renewable energy by 2050. Yes, there's likely to be hydrocarbons in the mix, but if we can move to this world, we're certainly going to start to stop that global warming from happening. And we're seeing huge technology cost declines over the years. Since 2010, 85% less cost for solar, 49% less cost for wind, and batteries as the foundation for storing energy when the wind isn't blowing or the sun isn't shining is dropped to 85% below what it was in 2010. One of the big sort of stars of wind and battery energy storage is down in Australia, the Hornsdale wind farm, and it's got a huge amount of generating capacity. It's got Tesla batteries put into place very publicly, and very typically Elon Musk sort of went online and said, okay, we can deliver this within 100 days or you'll get this for free. And it solved a huge problem down in Australia around rolling blackouts and some difficulties there. So this is actually starting to pay back the initial investment of 90 million Australian dollars in the first 3 years of operation and starting to earn money on its own. And that's a really exciting project that's out there. But a little closer to home, we're starting to see companies like Suncor put in huge wind farms in Alberta, McGrath, huge amount of generating capacity by the end of this year. And we're seeing a huge amount of investment of these companies that are traditionally, energy companies in terms of fossil fuels into diversifying their portfolios to provide renewable energy. And I think that the amount of fossil fuels that they'll be working with will be reduced greatly over time. And when I look to farming, there's such exciting thinking in this area. Agrovoltaics, the idea that you can put solar panels above crops that can withstand a bit of shade, and this is a particular operation out in Germany. You've got anaerobic digesters and ways of generating energy on the farm and being able to use that. And maybe some of you already use that. So it's really great, and it's a great way of earning extra money and pushing energy back into the grid. But there's going to be a big change over the next 40 to 50 years. And that seems like a long way into the future. But there are plans in place to build a global energy supergrid with renewable energy being traded in real time across border. Now, we're already seeing projects in Asia, the Asian supergrid. We're seeing it in the North Sea between the EU and the UK, generating energy and swapping energy. There's huge exchanges between China and Russia of energy. And this is where we're heading into in terms of a future for energy production, distribution, and a market as a whole. And people are saying that it's not about the cost of generating electricity. It's just really driving down very cheap distribution as the business model versus the extraction and the refinement of those fuels for energy. Okay, let's move on from electricity and energy into electrical swarms. And this is the application of the energy that we storm. And we're headed into a world where electricity could be normal. If anyone on the call has ordered the Cybertruck, then I'd take my hat off to you. A lot of my friends have. I'll be very interested to see what it looks like when it turns up. But people like Elon Musk and Tesla have been shouting about electric vehicles for a long time. I drive an electric vehicle. It's incredibly painful to drive in Ontario because of the infrastructure, but life is getting better. But we're starting to see even traditional companies like Ford stepping up. We know that they're going to be producing a lot of electric vehicles here in Ontario, and here's the F-150 pulling £1 million worth of weight. So that's kind of exciting. It's got the torque, it's got the power, but does it have the longevity? That's still the challenge in terms of range, but we're getting there. And now we're seeing heavy industry really stepping into this. You've got the Tesla Semi in Norway, where they're within a couple of years going to be 100% of new cars sold being electric. They've got electric car ferries in China. They've got these container ships that are fully electric. This goes 40 miles up the Yangtze, gets recharged and offloaded and reloaded and comes back down the Yangtze. Ironically, they take coal up the Yangtze on this particular barge. That irony is not lost on me. But China is now electrifying its cities, all of the bus infrastructure, all the car infrastructure, and it's going to be really, really exciting. And then obviously into the agricultural world, we're seeing new electrical vehicles like the Fendt E100. We're seeing the Solar Track, which is a smaller tractor, but pretty attractive for some people. And then we've got different kinds here as well. So the Case 2 Magnum, John Deere's got a rather radical idea of running a 1,200-yard power cord out to its tractor out in the field, which is a pretty wild idea, but maybe for some applications could be pretty good. You've got the Small Robot Company with these small electrical sort of on-the-ground drones, and you've got other kinds of technologies as well that are out there being able to be automated, and it's the application of sensors and cameras and artificial intelligence. And now what we're finding is in the world, this growth of artificial intelligence, big data, the sensors, the Internet of Agricultural Things is leading us into a new sort of a way of looking at farms. I like to think about swarm farming. Can we be fully autonomous? Can we control it from a control room? And will we be a farm operation that's defined by data scientists and programmers more than the hardcore work of agriculture as it stands today? Here's a short video I put together of some of the technologies out there that kind of excites me. There's a huge amount of innovation out there, and as we saw, everything from the self-directing drones to the machines that are out in the fields are working in swarms, and I definitely think that that's a very plausible future for us to expect. Okay. I think that what we're finding, though, is that the harnessing and the use of data is becoming even more valuable today. We don't just capture data, we have to turn it into information and then usable knowledge, but really what we're doing within the agriculture industry is creating wisdom, and that wisdom lives amongst the farmers and the operators of large acreages, and that's used for real-world decision-making. How we share that and how we collaborate, very much like we're doing as part of this group, is going to really bolster the growth of the agricultural world and its market share of intellectual capital. And really, when we start to think about big data, what can we do? Better strategic planning, yield prediction, risk management, food safety and spoilage, operations and equipment management, farmer-to-farmer connections, and education. All of these things are going to lead to more efficiency and hopefully more revenues down the line. And there's a number of technologies out there that are really connecting farmers to each other. The Farmers Business Network really helps people trade and share information. We've got things like FarmR, which is like the Airbnb for farm equipment. That's pretty exciting. We've got the use of mobile technology and peripherals for using analysis whilst you're in greenhouses or in the fields. And things like this are really exciting me, and there's a lot of money going into agri-tech that's going to sort of really revolutionize how we do business. Some of it's very small and slight changes, and that's as important as the big rollouts of automated farm machinery as well. And then it gets super interesting. So IBM and its Watson artificial intelligence platform, it's enabling people to film a field of corn from a drone and use AI-enabled visual recognition analysis to identify crop disease or pest infestation. So really just helping those farmers do more. And you've got farmers like Rorik Pullman down there in Nebraska. I can react in real time and won't lose yield waiting for the agronomist. Now, I don't think agronomists are going to disappear. I certainly think there's going to be a lot of these tools that become part of the toolkits for agronomists and farmers alike. It's an ever-evolving world. It's exciting. And then I found this guy, the Millennial Farmer. He's on YouTube. He makes a decent amount of money from ad revenue from YouTube. He shares knowledge. He increases his revenues. And really, the stories that he shares about the operations on his farm really sort of starts to socialize the idea of what actually happens in the fields. And I know there's some discussion before this about, what's the connection between the consumer and the farmer. Things like this are really starting to bring people together. And this kind of content, especially driven by younger farmers, is going to be really important in telling that story. Interestingly enough, there's so much technology in farming, and there always has been, but the Silicon Valley and the technology industry has been fairly arrogant in a lot of different ways. And back in the 90s, Bill Gates said, I know there's a farmer out there somewhere who never wants a PC, and that's fine with me. How short-sighted that is. And now what we've got is Bill Gates is actually the largest agricultural landowner in the US and North America. So what's he doing in there? Big tech is coming for the business. And there's so much technology out there in so many different parts of the farm that we can see that everything all of the technologies that are available can help us with our operations, and we can do some really exciting things within our farms. But agri-tech and the platformization of farming and agriculture is something that the big tech VCs and investors are looking at right now. And these are the people that are going to get into agriculture more than anything else. People like IBM are more like platforms. John Deere has been there innovating for a long, long time. But people like Alphabet and Amazon, Walmart, Microsoft are really pushing forward. Walmart is the biggest employer of tech resources in Silicon Valley. Amazon is just going hell for leather in new innovations everywhere. Obviously, they bought Whole Foods. Why wouldn't they control a lot of that supply chain even into the fields as well? It's certainly going to be compelling for their leadership. But I think that here is a discussion around technology and ownership and empowerment for farmers as well. Whilst we're starting to see a wholesale sort of purchasing or ownership of the farm equipment and many of the platforms we use, we need to put the power back into the farmer's hands. And obviously there's a big discussion here around the ethics of right to repair. And in December a couple of years ago, the Nebraska Farm Bureau voted to support right to repair. And I think that we're going to start to see more discussions around the empowerment and the equity of farmers in the conversation. What's really interesting here, I read a report by Al Jazeera literally saying that the emerging digital platforms won't aim to help farmers share their knowledge or promote diverse seed and animal varieties. It's about conformity and control. So there's something here. I'm not going to read this out. Do go and read this article. There's a shift. The way that big tech companies operate is they tend to work out what steps need to be taken to grow food. What are parts of the system? Holistically, how does this work? And then they try to codify everything. And really, they try and remove the humans from the system. I actually think the future is about human and the machine. And as we talk more about artificial intelligence, that's going to be really important to bear in mind. Okay. let's look at diverse ecosystems, and what if we look at new opportunities and places for growing food? I actually do think that we're going to be coming back into the suburbs and the cities, and even slightly further out, but not as far as out into the fields to grow foods. Out there in Holland, there's a floating dairy farm. In Rotterdam, obviously land's at a premium, so why not just build it onto water? We've got the Sky Farm down in Indianapolis on top of a hospital, being able to grow food there. I've actually advised a lot of clients recently that have got a lot of roof space to start looking at this, and there's lots of opportunity to look into the research of growing food like this. Downtown in Detroit, the Detroit People's Food Co-op. There's lots of inner cities starting to look to more equitable growth of food and the distribution of cheap food for the neighborhoods versus people, really struggling to feed their families and really leaning into processed food. And then you've got Elon Musk's brother, Kimball, has got a company called Square Roots, where he takes containers from ships and he gives them to entrepreneurs to build their own small vertical farms and incubators for new farming ideas. So I think that when we start to look at this, it shows that there's going to be some of the produce grown in cities. It's not easy. There's been a lot of people I've chatted to about trying to set up vertical farming, and it's quite difficult from a technological standpoint, but really you can grow more food with less water, less fertilizer, a lot more efficiently if you get it right. And now we're even seeing in places like supermarkets, the German company Infarm letting you grow microgreens right there in the aisle next to the vegetables that we've provided as well. So there's a lot of revolutionary thinking and innovation in the supermarkets, in the fields, but also back into the cities. And what's really interesting is the vertical farms and the ability to grow food. It really is booming. It's actually going to be $1.5 billion of annual sales of food from vertical farms by 2030. Okay, let's look at genetics, and let's look at how things are evolving there. I'm not talking about GMOs, I'm talking about splicing DNA using CRISPR-Cas9 and other technologies that are helping us deal with a number of situations that cause loss of produce. Tuning into one of the many ways biologists are remaking the tomato. Down in the UK, they're gene editing tomatoes to make them resistant to powdery mildew and tomatoes without seeds. And these are things that are really advanced. Obviously, we can look to places like Holland that are doing a lot of work in this area, and even here in Canada as well. What's interesting is you can also apply this to the rearing of cattle. Black and white Holstein dairy cattle with no horns and male pigs that never reach sexual maturity, avoiding the boar tank, can make pork chops unpleasant. So really it's sort of disrupting the genetics of animals so that we can get more out of that as a supply chain. Genes can be modified to massively increase resistance and resilience to infection, says Professor Eleanor Riley of the Roslin Institute. The health and welfare benefits of this could be enormous, and we're starting to see the promise of that being delivered. But off the back of that, I like to talk about protein evolution, and this really does get the backs up on a number of people. And I've been on a lot of stages with cattlemen and people that work in rearing chickens and pigs and cattle about where we're going with protein. There's going to be a 73% increase in demand for meat by 2050, and the meat market will be worth $7.3 trillion. That's a lot of money. If we can produce protein at scale in different ways than just rearing animals, then there's going to be some winners in the market, and that's why it's garnered such a lot of investment. I took this picture down in California a couple of years ago, and who would have thought that you would have something that isn't meat in the meat aisle pretending to be meat? Now, this is disruption at the grassroots, and this is sort of the confusion that's going into the consumer's mind. I eat Beyond Beef, and I actually think it's pretty great, but I also eat chicken and pork and lamb and other meats as well. But this kind of disruption happens at a very base level. And now we've got obviously the Impossible meats pork substitute out there, and we've also got this lovely chicken called Ian. Now Ian is owned by a company called Just. He's retired. He provided his cells, and now Just grows chicken protein from the cells that Ian's actually provided. It's pretty exciting. And now you can have bioreactors that can grow 50 tons of pork cells, and every 2 months produce a huge amount of protein by using starter cells from 10 pigs. This is going to be the model for protein production. I do think that there is going to still be a market for artisanally grown or reared meat, but to actually deploy this, we're ending up in a world that's sort of changing the way that it's thinking about protein and food. There's going to be a 50% reduction in the number of cows in the US by 2030, so says the Silicon Valley think tank, RethinkX. And the cattle farming industry will be all but bankrupt. I don't like these hyperbolic statements. I think they're a bit much, but Tony Seba, the guy behind RethinkX, is incredibly smart, and he's generally right about things like energy, and I think that it's going to be really interesting to see that disruption of protein out there in the world. Now, this is what I think is going to be happening in the next 20 or so years. You know, protein is going to be like Coca-Cola. You're going to be able to have bioreactors in smaller facilities, maybe restaurants, maybe supermarkets. Some people may even have them at home, and you'll be growing your own protein. It's going to be like sending out Coca-Cola syrup and then just making it yourself with a soda stream. That's a pretty radical idea, but at the same time, technology kind of works that way. It's like simplify, roll it out at scale, and then monetize the parts of the system that you have to purchase, and likely on a subscription. Okay, let's get into thinking about the future and the methods that I use. I use something called strategic foresight, and that it helps me to really look at principles and the signals, very much like I've shown you today, and what we're going to do today with the exercises in the workshop around hypothetical scenarios, and helping us look out 5, 10, 20 years so that we can backcast some of that narrative and some of that evidence from our future fictions that we create back into strategic planning and risk analysis today. But what's really interesting when we do start thinking about that future is the opportunity to really look at something that's exciting, a far future. The far futures that we imagine are really difficult to understand. So I actually write fiction that enables people to understand how the world will be. Let's look out to the year 2220, a new ag frontier. It's been 150 years since the end of the energy wars, and 100 years since any war on Earth has been waged. The world has never been so unified in its mission to support all 15 billion beautiful humans to thrive. Our global economy is enabled digitally, and international trade has never been so good. Sustainable agriculture is at the forefront of that ecosystem evolution. A core part of this story is the hugely successful global food supply network. It runs using the global Internet of Energy data, sensors, and real-time aware intelligence that informs farmers, scientists, and innovators to drive humanity forward more than ever before. A core goal was to create a diverse and equitable platform for rural and urban farmers, large and small, around the world. We're exceeding that today in 2220. Our farming community will be diverse in nature, with a majority of women leaders and groups we see underrepresented today, with the support and empowerment from all levels of the industry, government, and consumers. Agriculture, a story that started thousands of years ago, is still our story. It runs faster than ever. It's a story of resilience, innovation, and community. Its business is food, technology, DNA, and more, and that approach is contagious, with effects spreading to other industries. The Industrial Revolution is no more. We've moved from industry to humanity. And I like to lean into Wendell Berry, and my mother-in-law actually sent me a poem, and she said, you need to read this to the crowd when you speak to farmers. Ask the questions that have no answers. Invest in the millennium. Plant sequoias. Say that your main crop is the forest that you did not plant, that you will not live to harvest. And that's from his manifesto, The Mad Farmer Liberation Front. I'm sure a lot of you know who Wendell Berry is. And that's it. That's the agricultural futures. That's the keynote that I'm giving, and I'd love to take your Q&A from this point forward. So feel free to step up.